It's got to be really hard to be a Jacksonville Jaguars fan right now. You're going through the worst stretch of play in the history of the organization. These last 3 years of this David Caldwell, Gus Bradley regime have produced anything other than positive results and have to really have you questioning the current and future direction of this organization and how much longer things are going to continue to be this bad. I mean, let's be honest here. Over the past 3 years, the Jacksonville Jaguars have went 9-39. 9-39, including going 3-13 this year. In a season where many people, even myself included, thought there was going to be a little more progression, a little more improvement. Maybe this was going to be a 5 or 6 win football team, and it just didn't manifest. It just didn't happen. And you really have to wonder if the right guys are in the right positions in the right organization at this point in time if you're a Jacksonville Jaguars fan, and who could blame you? Because the proof's in the pudding. This pudding tastes like shit. It truly does. You look at over the past 3 years, the first round picks, Justin Blackmon, Luke Joeckel, Blake Bortles, really haven't panned out very well so far. Only time will tell if those picks do become better and the organization looks better off for them. But the biggest, most damning thing I could say about this Jaguars organization and this current Jaguars regime is that over the past 3 years, they have drafted 0 Pro Bowlers. 0. When your first round picks aren't becoming your stars and you're not finding any real Pro Bowl caliber gems later on in the draft, there's a big significant problem because the best, most effective way to build a consistent championship contending or at least winning football team in the National Football League is through the draft. And when you consistently screw the pooch on the draft, it puts your organization in a bad way and really buries you for a long time to come. And that's what it's starting to look like in Jacksonville. I mean, at least in 2014, Jaguar fans were like, once and for all, the Blaine Gabbert era is done. That mistake is gone. Here is Blake Bortles. We might not have a lot, but at least we have this first-round pick at quarterback. He's supposed to be the franchise savior. He's supposed to be that guy. If anything else, this season we can look at and watch his development and watch him grow as a player, and maybe that'll be a better indication of things getting better very, very soon. Except Blake Bortles got that opportunity and really didn't show much. He might look the part in a lot of ways, but is he really the part? If you go based off of his performance as a rookie, signs would point to no. Now, that ultimately should not damn him forever, but it's not a great start to the Blake Bortles era in Jacksonville. Talking about a quarterback that had like 13 starts, only threw 11 touchdown passes, had 17 interceptions, under 60% for a completion percentage. It was not good. Now, ultimately, he wasn't helped by his offensive line that struggled all year in the run game and was by far the worst in pass protection in the National Football League. They allowed 71 sacks. I don't give a damn who you are. If you consistently have pressure in your face and you are consistently getting hit as a quarterback, it is really hard to build confidence. It is really hard to stand tall in the pocket. It is really hard to grow and progress when you're always under the gun. You're always under pressure. You're always getting hit. It's really hard to get in a rhythm. So in Blake Bortles' defense, it is not just on him by any stretch of that imagination at all, because this offensive line was boo-boo. And frankly, this offense in general was boo-boo. So I'm not surprised, even with the young quarterback, to have seen the Jacksonville Jaguars already fire their offensive coordinator because their offense sucked for all pretty much of 2014. They had 12 games where they scored 17 points or less. It's kind of similar to what I talked about with the Buccaneers and with the Titans. If you're scoring 17 points a game or less, you're in a bad way. You just flat out have to score more points to be able to win consistently in the National Football League. And that's even if you have a really good or great or dominant defense. You have to score more points than that. You have to be able to put points on the board. And knowing the Jaguars at 3-13 in 2014, you have to know that not only was the defense or offense bad, but the defense wasn't a whole hell of a lot better. And they really weren't. I know the narrative through the second half of the season was how this Jaguars defense was playing better and they were doing better. That's slightly misleading. Yeah, they were doing a better job as the year went along, getting more pressure on opposing quarterbacks, but this was still a bad defense, especially in the back half of the defense in the secondary. And they started to get more pressure on opposing quarterbacks, but they still struggled against the run to a certain degree, and they definitely still struggled to stop opposing teams' passing games. And you look at this Jaguars defense in 2014, they had 6 games where they allowed 30 points or more. It was a total team suck effort. So to sit there and just blame it on the offense is not an accurate way to place blame because the defensive side of the ball still struggled mightily in 2014 throughout the season. And when you have a defensive-minded head coach who's coming from this great system in Seattle to be able to implement some of these changes to be able to try and mirror the way it was done in Seattle, you see these type of results and you really start to wonder again if the general manager David Caldwell is in over his head and if the head coach Gus Bradley is really the guy. And you really have to question that. I mean, offensively, 32nd, dead butt naked last in the league in points scored, 31st in passing yards. On the defensive side of the ball, 26th in total points allowed, 26th in yards allowed. Like I said, terrible offense, frankly, terrible defense too. And you look at what happened in the offseason, the Jaguars had all this salary cap space, so they got adventurous in free agency. Well, when you're building your team through free agency, like my Chicago Bears have tried to do, it's because you have failed in the draft, and when you have failed in the draft, you are a failure. And all that happens in free agency is you get older and spend more money, and there usually aren't results that correlate with that. You know, the Toby Gerhardts, the Zane Beadles, the Red Bryants, the Chris Clemens, the Ziggy Hoods. You know, yeah, bringing in guys like Bryant, Clemens, and Hood in theory would seem to have helped the defensive side of the ball a little bit, except the results don't show that it did. Gerhardt wasn't going to be a feature back and proved that. Beatles most certainly didn't help that offensive line that struggled all year in the running game and gave up the most sacks in the league. So it was a bad free agency period for the general manager as well. If he can't draft well and he doesn't even make good, astute moves in free agency, then what purpose does this guy serve? And does he really deserve to be in that position anymore? Now you look at the draft, though, and you have to say that this was by far the Jaguars' best draft under the Caldwell Bradley regime. You had players like Allen Robinson, Brandon Linder, Telvin Smith, Chris Smith, an undrafted player like Allen Hurns, Marquise Lee when he was healthy, and yes, even Blake Bortles. You know, this is easily the best draft the Jaguars have had. Easily the most impact out of any draft class during this regime, I should say, of Caldwell and Bradley came out of 2014. But at the end of the day, Lee and Robinson could be 1,000-yard receivers in the NFL for a decade to come. Allen Hurns could be another NFL, wide receiver that produces 800 to 1,000 yards every season. You could have Brandon Linder establish himself as a quality NFL right guard. You could have Telvin Smith and Chris Smith become 2 future starters on defense. And Telvin Smith was probably, frankly, the best rookie out of this entire class, and he was a 5th-round pick. Even with that being said, ultimately that draft will be about Blake Bortles. And if he's not a success, it will set this organization back years. In part, it would only bury this organization even more because of the poor job coaching by Gus Bradley, and in particular, the even poorer job of building this team by David Caldwell. This organization has already been set back years. When you look at this organization's needs heading into the offseason, the first and foremost thing they have to do, no matter what anybody says, is they have to repair that offensive line. They have to give Bortles an offensive line to have a fucking chance. They need help at tackle. They need help at guard. I don't give a damn. Period. If you don't think the number one need for the Jacksonville Jaguars with a young quarterback that you took 3rd overall behind an offensive line that surrendered 71 sacks in 2014 is the offensive line, then you are a moron. There is not a single guy in that offensive line at this point in time that has any way established themselves as being a guy you could count on to be a future long-term quality starter in the National Football League level. That even includes your 2nd overall pick from 2013, Luke Joeckel. He's doo-doo on the left side. He's going to have to flip over to the right side or even inside the guard to have any chance to stick, frankly. This team needs help at tackle. They need help at guard. That offensive line you've got to fix. Then you've got to find a running back that could be an every down back. You need that guy that could replace what Maurice Jones-Drew once brought to this organization. You know, Denard Robinson's an okay player, but he's not an every down back, and he's not a special player. I like Storm Johnson, but I don't know if he's a special player. The Jaguars, again, need to prioritize helping out Blake Bortles. They have to give him more to work with. They need to give him more protection, and the best way to protect a young quarterback is by giving him a quality offensive line in front of him and a running back behind him, period. They also need to find a tight end. The days of the Mercedes Lewises and the Clay Harbors of the world being good enough needs to fucking kick rocks. They need in a league that in part is driven by those athletic tight ends that create real mismatches. The Jaguars, no matter what idiot says, don't have that guy. And again, for a young quarterback to succeed, you need that guy. If the Jacksonville Jaguars go into this draft and spend 2 or 3 of their first 4 picks on the defensive side of the ball, that will show you how idiotic David Caldwell and Gus Bradley truly are. It will set your young quarterback back to a point where he may never recover, set this organization back for years, and we will be beginning to watch to see how soon it is in the 2015 season that both Caldwell and Bradley are ultimately shown the door. They have needs on the defensive side of the ball, too. Don't get me wrong. They need help in that secondary. They can still use more on the defensive line. They can still use a pass rusher in that linebacking core. But at the end of the day, this offseason has to be about offense. When you are butt naked last in the league of points scored, 31st in passing yards, you give up the most sacks in the league. You have 3/4 of your games where you score 17 points or less. Until you get that fixed, until you start to turn that around, nothing else you do on the defensive side of the ball is ultimately going to fucking matter to hella beans. The Jaguars' only priority this offseason, in my opinion, has to be fixing the offensive side of the ball. Getting that offensive line, finding that running back, and finding a tight end that can create those type of mismatches that successful NFL offenses are able to create with those type of tight ends.